Welcome back to the Gilded Hour podcast, everyone. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Mabel.
And we are here hosting a podcast that explores the real-life history, people, and art, costumes, beautiful things of the Gilded Age. So we are exploring this within the context of the television series and, the real-life history of things that actually happened back in the 1880s. Yes. So how are you doing?
Cold. It's currently brisk 9 degrees outside where I am.
So. Yeah, it's in the single digits here too. We couldn't record this podcast last week as we had planned because you and I both lost electricity.
Yep, that was fun times.
So we're really
so fun.
We're in the thick of winter. Both of us are. It's not fun. This podcast episode will probably release in the spring, so I am just going to be so relieved when I can be outside.
Ooh, I hope we're thawed out by then. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. Like I would love to see green grass, birds.
That would be wonderful.
All right. In the meantime, I am super happy about today's episode because this is pretty much my favorite topic to talk about. We are going to talk about the portraits and the costumes of the Gilded Age. So again, we're talking about both the portraits and costumes we see in the television series and also how that compares to the art and the clothing of the real life 1880s Gilded Age. You and we have talked about costumes and pretty things before.
I do enjoy a great costume. I know that when we watched Outlander together, you and I, we were always had a keen eye on Claire's costumes, especially when she was in France. So this has a little bit of opulence going on, so we still get that like, ooh, fancy, like those types of costumes. It really always interests me how deep a costume designer actually goes to make sure everything is as historically accurate as possible. That a lot of people don't think about that. But it is very important. Nothing is worse than something anachronistically being wrong with the time period of a show that you're watching. It will take me out of it so fast. So costumes are important, everyone.
So I'm glad you brought up Outlander because we are going to talk about a dress that Claire wore in Outlander.
Ooh, okay, yay.
So the topic of today's episode really not only applies to how people, hopefully our listeners will watch the Gilded Age show, but also any other kind of historical fiction show or movie, or even if you're reading a book that describes costumes. I am not an expert in historical costuming, but I have, I guess you could say, informally studied it over the years. I'm more from the art history side of things, so there's a lot of overlap there. We're going to talk a bit about painters and the kind of portraits they were doing in the Gilded Age, and that blends into the costumes. The costume design specifically for this show was based on a lot of paintings, so we're going to talk about some of those paintings. As with our other episodes, I thought I would give us all a little summary of this episode of The Gilded Age. And I also want to do a quick intro of why we're talking about portraits and costumes with this episode.
Yeah.
This episode is kind of bouncing off of the third episode of the first season of The Gilded Age. I'll give a little update on Peggy because we're going to talk about a topic that's pertinent to Peggy next week. Peggy is still trying to be she's still an aspiring writer. She's trying to get her work published. And in this episode, she's excited to learn that the editor of the Christian Advocate is interested in publishing her work. But when she goes to meet the publisher, she is told that they will only publish a story if the lead character in her work is changed to a white girl. And if her personal identity as the author is kept a secret from readers, saying that they would lose readership if it was known they had published a story by a Black author. So she ends up declining the opportunity.
Good for her.
Yeah. She has some self-respect there.
It sucks that she's even in that position at all. This is, mind you, this offer is after she sat there literally all day because when they found out she was Black, they didn't even want to see her. Yeah. So, yeah, poor Peggy.
it really helps build the world and the context that we're seeing on this show. And it gave some very interesting insight into the challenges she would have faced at the time. So we'll get back to that next week.
Perfect.
Meanwhile, we have Ada, who meets a former male friend, someone she knew in her past. He shows some romantic interest in her, but Agnes discreetly informs the man that Ada has no money, and he runs away. So we clearly know what he was after.
Dodged a bullet on that one, Ada.
She did. And she's so sweet, too. I don't want her to get entangled with the wrong person.
I know. She was just so genuinely kind of like flustered and stuff. Aww.
Yeah. Meanwhile, after only a few encounters, we have Tom Rakes giving a, sort of marriage proposal to Marion. She doesn't provide him with an answer. She doesn't, honestly, in my opinion, seem all that interested. She does point out that her Aunt Agnes would not approve of the match, and Agnes certainly has her doubts about Mr. Rakes and his intentions. She calls him an adventurer, which is kind of a funny word. Now, ever since seeing this episode a few years ago, I in my mind, instead of, using a modern day term to think of a guy or a character or whatever, I think, oh, Agnes would call him an adventurer.
This is an adventuring man.
Meanwhile, the big drama of the episode, after coming to a gentleman's agreement with the town alderman about passing a law to allow his train station to move forward, George is surprised to learn that the law will be repealed, and he immediately realizes that the aldermen are manipulating the stock to their advantage. To prevent his company from going under, George risks his personal fortune to buy back as much company stock as possible to keep it stable, thus driving the aldermen into financial distress. Privately, Bertha talks to George and demonstrates unwavering support for his plan to counter the aldermen's ploy, understanding that he is risking their fortune to save his company from losing its value, or essentially from going under. And we have a Mrs. Morris who visits Bertha and pleads her to ask George to show mercy on them. Bertha shrugs off the request and pretty condescendingly tells her that the nature of stock is that it goes up and down, and, she really doesn't owe her anything. She doesn't owe her any favors. The aldermen end up begging George to stop artificially inflating the value of his stock to save them from financial ruin, but he doesn't really shrink back, at least in this episode. And the episode ends with Mr. Morris ending his own life. So kind of a bleak end to the episode. And the obvious, topic for this podcast would probably be let's talk about the stock market and what happened.
God, please no.
What happened there? And, I think other people have covered this topic already. Essentially, the aldermen were shorting the stock. So it was artificial manipulation of the value of the stock. It was going up and down. And either George was going to get screwed or the aldermen were going to get screwed. There's play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
Someone, yeah, exactly.
Someone was going to get screwed over. This was based on a real thing that happened back in the Gilded Age, and honestly, it still happens nowadays. The GameStop thing of 2021.
That thing on Reddit, that was what? There's
that was a different flavor, actually, of what was happening here. So I will, at some point on this podcast, talk about some of the real life robber barons that inspired George and some of the other characters that pop up on this show. We're not there yet. I'm actually waiting till later in the season when there's this giant ball and we've been properly introduced to all of the major players of Gilded Age New York. And then we'll talk about them. We'll talk about the real life people. So I'm going to hold off on that. And economics, they're not my thing, so...
Nope, me either.
Let's not talk about that this episode. So what did inspire me to go into the topic, something completely different and kind of fluffier than all of this. Essentially, I want anyone watching this show, and like I said earlier, I want anyone watching this show or other shows that take place in this period to kind of understand what was happening in terms of dresses, outfits. You have all this visual culture. You have beautiful interiors of homes. You have homes like the Van Ryn house, which is like this old but kind of like cozy and stuffy, old school looking brownstone home in New York versus the Russells' new and fresh and airy and light house. I'm not going to go into the architecture, although, again, I would love to do that in the future. Today is just like a big welcome to the Gilded Age visual culture.
This is 101.
Yeah, 101. So what inspired me to go into this with this episode of the show in particular was this kind of like just very short scene where George and Bertha are talking in their, I believe it was the drawing room in like the main family room of the time. And it's sort of in my opinion, it's like a really beautifully shot scene. It's this interesting scene where Bertha and George are talking about how George has to risk his whole fortune to, you know, hopefully save his business from the alderman thing. And he's standing up, she's sitting down, and she's like looking up at him. And it's this weird, like weirdly submissive sort of pose that she has. And she's just telling him like, yeah, I'll support you. I'll do whatever. I think her words were something along the lines of, we made one fortune together. If need be, we can make and spend another. So she was like totally on board to risk all of her money and wealth to make everything happen. And yeah, it was like him looming over her. It was sort of this strange tension. But then in the background, what comes into view is this massive portrait of like this woman with this sweeping skirt. And so in my first...
It's her, right?
Yeah,
like it's Bertha. I always just assumed it was Bertha.
It is. Okay. It totally is. So in my first watch, I was like, whoa, that's like so cool because it's got like her looming over both of them, which...
Yeah, you think she's submissive, but really she's the woman in the back pulling the strings. I mean...
And I mean, honestly, if you've seen all 3 seasons of the show so far, you kind of know that a lot of the show deals with this. Who's really in charge here? Is it the women controlling everything? Is it the men of industry? So yeah, there's obviously this tension. And so I was like, well, let me look into this portrait because they obviously modeled it after a certain style. And I realized, or I learned, that the set designers, the set decorators of the Gilded Age ended up modeling it after Boldini, who was a Italian portraitist of the era. So let's talk about portraitists of the era. So why portraits? Why did people want portraits?
Because it's kind of like when you look your best, you want to leave a legacy. And they didn't have photography, not good enough.
Yeah.
So you want to leave some kind of legacy about yourself, right? I'm guessing. I don't know if that's...
No, that's 100% it. And actually, photography couldn't really replace what portraits were doing until the 1970s.
Let's be real, that still can't. I mean, you still can't replace a beautiful piece of art with a photograph.
Yeah, no, if I were a billionaire, the first thing I would do would be to like commission a massive portrait of myself because it's so cool. It's so pretty, right?
It is.
So you had a group of men mostly who were working as portraitists of the era. Some of the painters who were doing portraits were more fashionable than others. Boldini was by far one of the most fashionable ones. Again, he was Italian, but he tended to work in London mostly, so he would paint portraits of the aristocrats over there. I read a few sources that said he was literally the most fashionable one of the era, so every bigwig would have wanted to have him do their portrait. Again, makes sense why they had Bertha.
Well, and so it is. It's a big show of how much money they have that she was able to get her portrait painted by Boldini.
Exactly. One interesting thing, like, I studied art history, but we didn't end up studying a lot of portrait painters. And part of that is because they weren't really taken seriously as artists until, honestly, like, very recently. We're kind of interested now because we see the value in this kind of art. I mean, everyone has a selfie, right? It's so easy to take selfies.
Yeah.
That it's like kind of nice to look back and be like, wait a second, these guys were really talented. They had this really interesting style. Boldini was known as the master of the swish because he had this beautiful movement in the clothes of the women that he was painting.
Well, and all the women look a little coquettish, like they have their little shoulder out, you know, like there's always a cold shoulder happening.
Oh, totally. Yeah, so it definitely reflected the cutting edge of fashion. Personally, I find these really fun because if you look at like paintings 100 years prior or 200, 300 years prior, they're either like really stiff, like almost like so formal and very sterile portraits of people, or they're religious devotional paintings. And a lot of times they were like during the Renaissance, you had nude women, and they were either like really devotional paintings or they were kind of erotic, or they were both in some cases. But in my opinion, what we're seeing here more on the end of the 19th century was these women are like real women. They had real personality.
Yeah, and you can see it. You can see it in the paintings.
Yeah, thanks. I was trying to get like a close-up picture of this, and this is the best I could find. And it was thanks to Carrie Coon's Twitter account. She had posted this back in 2022. So she took a closer-up picture of it, and I thought that was interesting.
Yes, thank you, Carrie Coon.
But yeah, I think they really evoked Boldini there, and I think it's a beautiful...
It's a good try. I mean, you can tell by when you look at the Gilded Age set one, the dress itself, like the bottom, does not look as refined as an actual Boldini. They really tried, but it just doesn't look as crisp as an original.
Like I kind of feel like they had looked at that one on the right of the screen.
Yes.
So P.S. if you're listening to this audio only, I will be putting this on YouTube with the slideshow that we're currently looking at. So you can take a look for yourself if you want to go to our YouTube channel. But
yeah, but you see how that one though, like the end of it, it doesn't just like flutter into chaos and it's done. Like it's a finished dress. The other one for the set looks a little messier at the bottom. Like it doesn't look like a finished dress.
Maybe they were on a time crunch. I don't
know.
But
it is a beautiful portrait. It is very and to be fair to the set design, we aren't actually seeing it this close up. I did not notice that in the actual shot of the show because it's not as close up.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I wanted to
like I didn't even see it.
It works really well. You can also tell how big it is in the shot of the show.
Yes, the scale is great. Yeah.
That's why we don't have a great...
Now imagine having to stand like that for like 40 hours, however long it took.
Well, hopefully the set designer for this one back in 2021 had just taken an iPhone photo.
Yeah, reference photo. Yeah, I hope so.
So another really popular portraitist of the era was Sargent, and I think a lot of people have maybe heard of him. But again, I don't think he really became very well regarded as an artist per se until more recent times. But John Singer Sargent, honestly, he's incredible. I encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast to like Google him right now because his paintings are so interesting. He was an American, but he was born abroad, actually. So he lived and worked most of his life in Europe. He, again, painted portraits mostly of wealthy individuals, but he really loved painting, and he actually did a portrait of Monet in his garden. So he also painted for fun. He did landscapes and things like that.
Nice.
There's been more like scholarship on him, so more academics have studied him, and he is regarded as someone who did more progressive like paintings of women. Again, like I kind of said with the last one, you see their personalities, you see them in more like natural poses of lounging or laying back or showing off their beautiful outfits or in the garden, whatever the case is. He captured kind of like everyday life or more of just the personality of the person. And then, as we'll see in a few minutes, the Gilded Age costume department. They got a lot of ideas for costumes from his paintings. I just chose these three because they're in the public domain. But one of my favorites comes from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Met in New York, and that's in the middle of the slideshow. And that's the portrait of Madame X. It looks so modern. She looks like a woman who stepped out of like right now. If you look at her dress,
yeah, she does.
Like everything about it's very, very modern and pretty. This portrait caused a really big scandal because he had originally painted it with the shoulder strap, that shoulder chain. It was actually off the shoulder, like it had dropped. Like she had nonchalantly, had her shoulder strap.
What is the difference between it being dropped and not? Oh my God, people are
it was exhibited in Paris, and he was still slightly earlier in his career when it was exhibited in the 1880s. So this one actually dates back to 1884, and it caused such a scandal that he was forced to remove it, and then he had to repaint it so the strap would be like on properly on her shoulder.
Jeez, wow.
And to be fair, I will mention that, the Gilded Age the people who work on this show must be big art history nerds, because that whole story made it into the script in the third season. Bertha ended up talking about Sargent.
Nice.
So very meta, but yes, that was all a true story. It really happened that Sargent had this scandal. And I think he went from working in France to London to like hide from the scandal.
Wow.
But anyway, he's done beautiful work. And then he was working well into the early 1900s, kind of more of the Edwardian, like Titanic era. He ended up quitting doing portraits because he wrote to his longtime friend that he abhors and abjures them and hopes never to do another, especially of the upper classes. So he really hated doing portraits of wealthy people.
I mean, it sounds like he had an awakening.
Yeah, he did. He ended up doing like landscapes and doing things he loved after that. So I guess that's a happy ending.
Yeah.
Finally, another portraits painter that I just really love is James Tissot, and he was a French painter, illustrator. He was, again, one of these guys who was really focused on people, women, and he especially was really, really interested in the fashion. So a lot of his portraits were designed to really show off the details of the clothes, which you can see here. And we will go back to him because the Gilded Age definitely took a lot of inspiration for their costumes from his work.
And you can see that very clearly in those slides, yeah.
Yeah, and there's something else that was inspired by, there's one painting he did called Seaside. He did it in 1878.
Looks like Ada.
Yeah, well, I mean, so throughout the Gilded Age television show, there are many costumes that I believe were really based on this one, that what the woman is wearing. But there's also a movie that was really inspired by this costume. So let's turn to the fashion, because as you can see, this pretty much blends into the whole like fashion of the Gilded Age era, but also the television show. So one thing I've seen online a lot, just paying attention to like fan groups and commentary from viewers, is that people kind of question whether the costumes in the show are realistic. Like, because they're so colorful, some of them are so over the top. They have like crazy poofy sleeves, or they have like weird necklines, or they have like strange bustles and bustles, which look like tails, a peacock tail or something. And so it is interesting. I kind of monitor like Facebook fan groups and Reddit fan groups, and this always comes up as people are like, these clothes aren't realistic. There's no way that people actually wore this because it was so colorful and everything. I'm here to say that the costumes are pretty realistic in my opinion. And they take artistic license where needed. One thing that we kind of started talking about last week when we were talking about, remember how we were talking about how much stuff cost?
Yes, yeah.
I shared with you that a woman's fine evening gown could cost like $100,000 in today's money. So a lot of these gowns that were made for like special evening wear came from the House of Worth, which was based in France. They started to pioneer our model today of being able to go out and buy a pretty dress in a shop. Basically, this wasn't possible prior to the Gilded Age, because prior to the late 19th century, women usually made their clothes, or they were aristocrats and they had like a person who could do that. Like Marie Antoinette had a person to make all of her clothes, for example. So this was kind of a big problem as people started to earn more and more money. They wanted to buy clothes, and they had to like go to dinners, and they had, you know, reasons to wear multiple outfits a day because they'd have a dinner dress, they'd have a day dress, and so forth. And so, yeah, there was a big demand, especially for women's clothes, but also men's clothes. So what was happening in the 19th century was they started to figure out how to make men's clothes in factories, and the reason for that is the military. Like, military, especially if you think Civil War, they had to have tons of uniforms. And so they started to roll out this concept of having clothes that men could wear that was fairly uniform. There were some department stores that cropped up in France that sold men's clothes that had already been made, and children's clothes, because children are, again, a little bit easier to
that makes sense.
Create standard clothes for. But women, on the other hand, they were still wanting to wear these like really heavily ornamented clothes that really needed to be tailored to their specific body, like their height, their weight, their chest versus their everything had to be tailored to a woman, because women come in a ton of different shapes. So the House of Worth was one of the, from what I understand, or what a lot of historians say, was one of the first to figure out how to mass produce women's clothes. And the way they did this was they came up with like a set number of designs and each season. And they would have essentially what we would call a fashion show. So they'd have the designs paraded around. Then women could see like which designs they wanted and then order them. And then they had an in-house, I wouldn't call it a factory, but they had a in-house team that would create the clothes for the women.
So it's kind of fun to see the bones of how we get to like Fashion Week and like how that all started and why. Very interesting.
Exactly. And the model really took off. And so they became really popular. And then you started to have the wealthy, especially in the United States, who had a ton of money to blow. They were ordering House of Worth gowns. So a lot of the Astors, for example, the real life Astors, ordered gowns from the House of Worth. On the slideshow, you see one, it's called like just ball gown. It was from 1887. It's at the Met. The Met Museum has a huge costume archive, I guess you could say, a huge costume department. So they do still have a lot of these old gowns. And then this one, which is such an interesting design. This is an evening dress. I think some people refer to it as like the ironwork gown, also done by House of Worth. And that's also at the Met. And we saw that in the Gilded Age. So minor spoiler, I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but this is the season 1 finale. Bertha ended up wearing this.
In the picture you showed, it looks like it was just a black and white dress. Did the show change it so that we have like, so that really kind of, unfortunately, that kind of supports the other argument of like, the clothes weren't as colorful as the show is making them, right? Like,
well, that's an excellent question. Yeah, so what we see when we look at old costumes, a lot of times we sort of these beigey, goldy colors from the era that, and that's for a couple of reasons. A lot of evening gowns of the time period were actually like a gold or beige color. Believe it or not, a lot of these gowns had gold woven into the fabric itself.
Oh, I believe it.
Actual gold or silver. So like there would be silver gowns and real metal silver would be woven into the gown. And by the way, that also explains why they were so expensive. So
Well, yeah.
paying $100K because there's literal gold woven into the dress. So not only was that a labor-intensive process, but also a very expensive process. So anyway, to answer your question, for an evening dress, yes, a lot of times the popular color was like a gold or a silver. But another thing to keep in mind is when fabric ages, the color fades a lot. And so if you've ever been to a museum or even just seeing pictures online of like archived costumes from the era, we're not seeing the full color because the color has faded over time. And so that's kind of why like we think of these old-timey things as being in like sepia and brown. And really, they had way more color than we think.
So this next dress was actually blue. Like it faded so much that the previous slide looks genuinely, it looks like it's just a black and white dress. Like it looks like it's just black and white. So I would never say that was blue ever.
This is a black and white photo. If I'm not mistaken, the actual color of the dress, I believe, was silver. I will double check that. So it was a silver and black dress. They made it blue. Part of the reason they made it blue, in my opinion, is it probably looks better on screen because
absolutely. Yeah.
She was also going to an opera house that was entirely red. So this
so they gotta
color, it
make
pops.
It look
It pops in a red location. But we're going to talk about how this was actually a really fashionable color at the time. So
very nice.
Not anachronistic, not too bad. Here's another super colorful like gown from the House of Worth. And Bertha wore it in the season 3 finale. It's in the promo pictures, so again, I'm not spoiling anything by showing this. If you're listening to this podcast, you've probably seen the entire series. Yeah, this was the season 3 finale. She wore this red dress, showing the red for an evening gown. And I think their interpretation of it was super beautiful as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And just to mention, like, this ball gown that they based it on is from 1898, about 1900. So it's a little bit after the show takes place. It's about 10 years later, but being one of the more modern characters, I think it kind of makes sense that they put her in a more modern design. So talking about color, I have got to talk about green because personally it's my favorite color. But it's also like the most controversial color in history, in my opinion.
Love that.
So, have you heard these stories about how, like, the green colors of the past poisoned people?
Yes. In fact, I read a book called Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and there's a whole part where they're trying to get this woman into a dress, and she's like, one of the servants says something along the lines of, and this one's a beautiful green. There's only a little bit of arsenic in it, so it shouldn't make you too sick.
There's a woman on TikTok, and she was like, this is the most poisonous color in history, you know, in the typical TikTok clickbaity style.
Yeah.
Dyes of the past are a whole rabbit hole that we could probably do a whole episode about very easily. But essentially, it was like really hard to get color in the past, like in the distant past, so pre-19th century, really only royalty could have color because it was just like insanely expensive. All color came from plants, so like flower petals, onion skins, what have you, different herbs. And that's how they made color. And, you know, you'd have to like get it really, really saturated to have lasting color on your clothes. So most people, like ordinary people, would dye their clothes with natural dyes to have color, but they weren't like really vibrant. With industrialization, there were obviously new inventions and new things being figured out all the time. And someone came up with a way to make this really stunningly beautiful green dye. There were actually 2 greens that I'm going to talk about. So the first one is called Shields green. It was very much like this beautiful grassy emeraldy green, and I think it's so pretty. The Gilded Age did use it a couple of times. They didn't. Okay, I doubt they used the real poisonous one. I think now they use safer synthetic options. But I do find it interesting they used it actually a lot for Bertha.
Bertha's just slowly poisoning herself. That makes a lot of sense.
Oh, it does make so much sense. Green had been a really difficult color to create prior to like the late 1700s. Someone invented Scheele's green in 1775, and it was really popular ever since after it was invented. So even 100 years later, like in the Gilded Age, consumers would still be demanding this color. There is a myth that they didn't know that they were poisoning themselves. A lot of historians actually believe they knew that it was dangerous to wear this chemical compound. They knew the risks, but, kind of like we do nowadays, we don't always know where all of this stuff in our clothing comes from. Even we rely on other people to kind of vet that safety for us, and then we purchase it and we wear it. So women were wearing this. I've also read some things by costume historians that say that like it wasn't going to immediately kill you the second you put it on. So if you think about how insanely like consumeristic people were in that era, they had multiple outfits to wear every single day. So they might just wear this green dress, for dinner, and then that was it. So they'd be putting it on for 2 hours. So I really don't know what they were thinking back in the time period, but as someone who loves this green, I could have very easily been susceptible to just being like, I'll wear it during dinner time. No problem.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Then there was also Paris green. So this is also really beautiful. Paris green was invented in 1814, and so again, just became this really trendy, popular color. On the Gilded Age show, seems to mainly be worn by Bertha, who is, again, really just poisoning herself. No big deal. Let's talk a second about green in shows like not just the Gilded Age. So green is this weird color that like continues to have this sort of enigma about it to this day, I find. And especially if you're watching movies and TV shows, but especially movies, like historical movies, it's not a show it's not a color that you don't see a lot of costumes in green, I find. And even like Googling it, there just aren't a ton of characters they put green in. And my personal theory is that it's become really associated in like probably the late 19th century, but also the 20th century and now into the 21st century with witchcraft and like evil.
Yeah, that's funny. It's funny you say that because I was just thinking, isn't that the dress Claire was wearing when she was like at her most witchy in Paris, and she like condemned that Comte to die or whatever it was? I'm pretty sure that's the dress she was wearing.
Yeah, it was, and I looked it up because I wanted to make sure it was. Yeah, so Claire in Outlander was at her witchiest when she wore this green dress. I think it's like pretty much the only green dress she ever wore.
I think it is, yeah.
It's stunning. They used it for promo photos, if I recall, for season 2.
They did, yeah. Yep.
And it's just
that and the red dress. That one in the red dress.
Oh yeah, the red dress too. Yep. Mm-hmm. So the green that the Outlander costume department would have used would have been, kind of with this idea that a green dye was invented. It predated their timeline a little bit, but it was pretty much invented again in the late 1700s. So.
And I mean, Claire was in France, which is like the height of like even then the most fashionable minds were coming out of that era. So if anyone was going to get a green dress at that time, it was going to be someone living in Paris.
Yeah. That was that was such a good season of Outlander. I loved that. And yeah, they really upped her game in terms of the fashion. And the green was the witchiest thing. And then, of course, we have Elphaba. But so I put a picture of Elphaba up here because she's green. Like, her face is green, of course. But that really comes off of the fact that Hollywood started to use green associated with witches in movies with the original Wizard of Oz movie. Mm-hmm. And green also had like this essence of like weird mystical things in the Gilded Age / Belle Epoque in France with absinthe. So like absinthe was this super popular drink. It was green. It was a green liquor. People were said to have otherworldly experiences when they had absinthe, and
to the point it was made illegal, right? Like,
yeah, they supposedly hallucinated and had all these experiences. In reality, I've read that they probably were just drinking too much.
Probably.
It was made illegal, and it was made legal again only in recent decades. I don't know the exact year, but it is now legal again. And I think it hasn't been a problem because people just aren't like downing it like they were in the 1890s Paris or whatever. So yeah, and then I have witchy mystical garden. This is like on the slide. I have a image of the Green Man, which was like a folk person in England who mystical creature from the forest. So obviously witches are associated with green, in my opinion, because they're associated with like herbal witchcraft. They're associated with forests and nature and all those things. And it's just become a part of like Hollywood culture. In my opinion, that also plays a part in the fact that like we're kind of fixated on arsenic green, and it was this dangerous color in the past, but actually they made dyes in the past. Not just green wasn't the only poisonous one. Mauve was also really popular back in the day, and that contained like really dangerous levels of toxins as well. And they wore it anyway because it was the popular color. I looked at a lot of fashion plates from the 1880s to kind of see how much color was used. A lot of the fashion plates I like can't post because they're owned by certain people. Fashion of the 1880s actually did have color. In the fashion plate I chose, there was like a woman wearing purple. There's another woman wearing this like sort of crimson color. There's one woman in blue in like a floral pattern, and then another one in beige in a floral pattern. We tend to think that they're wearing like these fancy outfits that are in gold and beige and silver, but in reality there were a lot of popular colors. I made little palettes of what I found or what I learned were kind of popular daytime colors, which you can see is super colorful. You had like pastels, peach, mauve, crimson, salmon, a teal blue, different kinds of blues like sapphire, and of course the famous emerald greens. And then evenings, I found out the color palettes were usually a little bit more subtle. So that would have been like the pinks, the beiges, the white, silver, black, kind of like what we would still consider better colors for evening nowadays. Now that we're like well versed on color and the fact that like the past had color, I can't go through all of the characters and all of their costumes for obvious time reasons. We would be here all day. But I pulled a few characters, and I just wanted to talk about the color and costuming choices for each one. So you have Agnes and Ada, who are obviously our old money New Yorker characters. And I found that on the Gilded Age, they're put into rich jewel tone outfits. And a lot of their cuts and of the outfits are kind of like what you would see in a museum from the era. So they weren't like the most extravagant outfits of the time, but they were clearly expensive. And I think this was a really wise decision because it's like their house is like this little jewel box. It's this warm and cozy, has a certain degree of wealth, but it's ostentatious either. And so I've noticed that they've basically been in these colors throughout all 3 seasons, but I think season 1, I believe all of these photos on this slide are from season 1. Yeah, they stuck to this jewel tone palette. The few times that Mrs. Astor shows up in season 1, I found this was interesting because for Mrs. Astor, like they put her in kind of those neutral palettes that nowadays we have this opinion that like the neutral palettes are like fancy palettes. So they really did that with her character. Still has beautiful gowns with tons of detailing, but they weren't giving her a lot of color. And then you have Peggy. So Peggy, in my opinion, has had the biggest costume transformation throughout the seasons. I found it interesting how they use a lot of like purple and like very rich sort of mauve-y, reddish crimson for her. A lot of that echoes kind of the wealthy surroundings of 61st Street, where she's working for Agnes.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of like they give her those jewel tones. So I found that pretty interesting that they had her in that same color palette as Agnes and Ada. And then what I love about her costumes, too, is that she has a lot of plaid in season 1.
They do, yeah.
And I guess, for me, I don't know why they did that. I actually looked it up. I tried to figure out why did they always put her in plaid. But I think for me, she's evoking that sort of academic look a little bit. I don't know. That's just me. It might be right or wrong. But she's kind of one of the, as the writer, I guess, she's just sort of evoking those academia.
It's like, yeah, especially the very last picture on this slide is kind of like school uniform-ish. Because every school uniform when I went to private school was plaid, like had a plaid skirt and stuff. So
I think they're using it to evoke like her educated, she's very well educated, and yeah, she wants to be a writer, and she's having to move within this more, she is moving within this elite circle.
And also, I don't know, and I don't mean for this to be a spoiler if it is, but isn't it supposed to be that her family is affluent too? Like for a Black family in that time, they have money, so I would assume that her clothing would also reflect that.
Yeah, exactly. So she's not as wealthy as, like, say, the robber barons on 61st Street, but she is... This is a mild spoiler, but we, like, find out in the next episode, the 4th episode. Her family is very well off in Brooklyn, and I think it makes a lot of sense that they put her in more of the affluent girl.
So yeah, so she can keep up with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, she knows what she's doing, essentially, with fashion.
I mean, honestly, it reminds me of the way like Black people feel like they have to they want to keep up with and look like they belong to this specific upper class. So, but visually she cues to other people, hey, I can keep up, like I can, so it's more of a visual cue, even if people still won't give her the time of day. Hey, I can still fit in with the best of you.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think we're gonna come back to what she's wearing in future seasons, because it's an interesting... Her outfits are an interesting way, in my opinion, that they further her narrative as the series goes on. Marion, I just want to say, like, I don't know why they have her channeling, like, Cinderella and Belle from Disney.
Very
She's
interesting.
Such the Disney character of the show. And
maybe to, like, her naivety or something. I don't know.
I think so. I think that could be it. They keep putting her in these baby blues or sometimes dark blues. They do use a lot of yellow or golds. Again, all colors that would have been found in the era. I find they make her look kind of on the girl, like a little bit too girlish at times. It can be hard to take her too seriously. Honestly, like, I'm still kind of waiting for them to do something more interesting with her. So. Then we have Gladys, which Gladys is really interesting. Like Peggy, she has this massive wardrobe evolution from season 1 to season 3, so we will talk about it again. But in season 1, they put her in these really girlish, almost outdated looking clothes, clearly to make her look young or to evoke the fact that her mom was holding her back and not letting her, come out in society. So she was forced to essentially still look like a little girl. She had her hair half up and half down, which is what girls or young women wore before they came out in society. And I will say she also wore a lot of purple, which was a period correct color. This is one of the more controversial comments I see online, like, all of the time, is that, why is Gladys wearing purple? It was a real popular color back in the era, so it's fine. But it does make her look extra girlish. I will also say, and cover your ears if you don't want any spoilers, purple has long been associated since biblical times with royalty. Just saying. Moving on. Finally, of course, no surprise, Amanda's obsessed with Bertha's wardrobe. Please give it all to me. Interesting things they do narratively with her wardrobe that I really, really love. And that is that they're constantly putting her in clothes that echo the scene.
Yeah.
So on the left on screen is this outfit that she's worn, I think, in 2 different seasons. It's like a gray silver dress. But down below it has like this almost like fishing net pattern.
Yeah, like a fish scale, like a mermaid
net
pattern. Almost.
Yeah, and I couldn't find a full-on like view of it to show you, but it does have a almost mermaid-style skirt.
Yeah.
Which might have been taking some creative liberties with the time period, but it wasn't completely off the mark. And so she wears this outfit when she's like trying to manipulate people to do what she wants. So usually it's with George, and they're like manipulating someone at a dinner party. That's Siren Bertha, hard at work, singing songs to men and, you know, ensnaring them in her net and drowning them or whatever she's doing. her mermaid siren outfit. She also has this like very sad poppy outfit, which if you look closely, the pattern on it is actually drooping poppies. So it's based on a real dress and a real fabric from the time period. I notice she always wears this in a scene when either she gets sad news or she has to give someone else sad news.
Oh, okay.
Like, she's wearing her sad poppy dress, so something sad is
something's about to happen.
I love it. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of circle back to the portraitists that we started talking about. Definitely the Gilded Age costume department had like a ton of historical portrait references when making costumes. Up on screen now, Sargent has a portrait called Madame Paul Poisson, and that was a dress that they lifted directly off of the original painting and put on Marion during a ball scene.
It looks almost exactly the same.
I love how they made it so similar. I hate the dress though because I can't get over that black like choker
I don't like
that they use.
the choker. Like the chokers, it makes me. There was a story in my childhood called The Green Ribbon or something. I can't remember, but it was all about this woman who wore a choker just like that, and then when she died, her husband took the choker off, and her head fell off. So that's all I can think about. Whenever people wear chokers like that,
I think I've heard of that. That's a terrifying story.
That's all I can think whenever I see chokers like that.
It looks like it is holding her head on. That's awful. A lot of Bertha's clothes come from Sargent paintings in particular. So if you look up the portrait of Mary Frances Hammersley, that is a dress they very specifically lifted off of the portrait and put on Bertha. I think that was it for a dinner scene in season 1. That same portrait I showed you by James Tissot.
Oh, the one that I said looked like Ada.
But you were right. Ada has worn, so it's a woman, if you're only listening to, this is a Tissot painting where the woman has like a lot of frothy layers on her dress. So the painting's called By the Seaside, a woman, you know, at the seaside, where typically people would have their like summer homes or vacation homes. So their way of dressing was a little bit less formal, we'll say. Not really less formal, but it was.
I mean, it looks like it still took 4 people to get her into that dress. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was lighter in the sense of it has tons of these light, frothy looking layers. It's in white with yellow bows and yellow accents. They clearly ended up creating a dress for Gladys based on this, and Gladys wore it at the seaside in the first season. And then same for Bertha. She has her like Newport outfit that she wears throughout all the seasons is also very much based on this dress. That light tiered white layers. Her vacation. This is this is their rest and relaxation clothing. And I had to shout out one of my favorite movies of all time, Titanic.
Oh, yeah. I knew this was coming.
Yeah, did you recognize that dress also inspired Rose's?
I sure did. I didn't want to say anything because I was like, I know this is coming to something, so I was just going to wait.
Yeah, I would love to do this same podcast episode, but for Titanic. Because
bonus content.
Like and subscribe if you want part 2, which is just like Titanic. This whole thing, but Titanic. Yeah, so Rose also wore a dress when she was walking with Jack on the deck of the Titanic. And then finally, I have to give a shout out.
Oh my God, Regina Mills. Oh my God, I haven't seen her in years. Bro.
I know. So I'm going to end on this note, a note of fantasy. So are the costumes of the Gilded Age show are not 100% historically accurate, nor do they need to be, in my opinion, because I do think, like, television, movies, whatever, it's more fun when people also get very creative and, like, try to, like, further the narrative through things like the clothing or even the set decoration and so forth. And so I just want to give a shout out. Some of my favorite kind of shows or things I've seen that really do this effectively, where they evoke an era but like use a lot of creative liberty to give this fantasy world is really cool. So as I was putting together this assembly of portraits and costumes, I couldn't help but think of like the Once Upon a Time show, which I don't know if you've ever watched that show.
I don't know. Sounds familiar. I don't know.
Maybe. The character of the evil queen, this fantasy character who was named in the show Regina Mills, she always had these costumes that honestly, in my opinion, evoked the Gilded Age. It used a lot of the same shape, style, structure. Like she had bustles sometimes. She had the big collars and hats and massive hairdos and over-the-top jewelry, things like that. You have things like the evil queen Regina in shows like Once Upon a Time that evoke the Gilded Age and those rich, brocades and the rich colors. So her costumes were done by, their costume designer was Eduardo Castro. And I think that's just such a nice blend of like historical references, but total fantasy too.
Yeah, agreed. And she was always in a lot of jewel tones too. So that also goes back to the era.
Yeah, there was a lot of, like, if you go back to the Sargent painting, that they ended up doing a Bertha dress, a red dress with the big collar.
Yeah.
You have shows like Bridgerton. I think a lot of people have talked about how that's like a historical AU kind of show, an alternate universe, where it's like the essence of the Regency era, but then they really effectively use color and pattern to kind of evoke different qualities of the different characters. And so they're like, again, blending that history with fantasy. Also on screen, I put a clip of a character from Gentleman Jack, which was a short-lived historical fiction show.
R.I.P. because that was a great show.
Yeah, it needs to come back. Like, they need to do a third season.
I wish it would come back. It was so good.
It was really good. They canceled it, but I think it was a victim of COVID because it ended up having
I think so too.
Gap. Yeah. I think it would have, I think we'd still be getting seasons if that didn't happen. But they also had the same thing that Gilded Age is doing, which is having like the modern character who was Anne Walker in like these high fashion, like blue, light colored, French style, light and airy fashions. And her house was light and airy and so modern. And then old school Anne Lister, the other main character, was like always in the jewel tones. And this is actually the main character's sister that I have pictured on screen. But the whole family was dressed in these like rich crimson jewel tones and things. Of course, I can't help but think about Downton Abbey when I think about the Gilded Age fashion, because Downton Abbey also was pretty faithful to showing period dress, but like always tweaked it a little bit to fit the narrative. And then pictured here, I have Sybil in her famous like outfit she wore, I think it was early on in the first season maybe, where she had like pants.
Yeah, maybe I think it was like the finale of season 1 or something.
Was it? Yeah, I think that would make sense because she like was wearing pants and it shocked everyone in her family. But anyway, it's a cool outfit. So that's kind of what I found the Gilded Age is doing, and I find it's very interesting what they're doing, and maybe I'm the only one, but I just really wanted to geek out about it this week, so.
All right, well, that is a wrap. Thank you for joining us for this episode. You can visit our website, gildedhourpodcast.com, for more information, links to resources, or if you just want to download the episode and keep it forever and not have to listen to any ads. So that is it, and we will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Gilded Hour podcast. If you would like more, you can follow us on Facebook, where we will notify you when new episodes are released. I also post short videos related to the content of these podcast episodes on TikTok at Gilded Minute. Finally, this podcast episode is releasing in June of 2026, and we just found out that HBO is releasing season 4 of the Gilded Age this fall. I'm starting a Patreon page where, among other things, I will be live streaming in the lead up to the show being back, and we'll try to have more things related to the newer episodes in the series over there. In the meantime, we will be back next week for another new podcast episode.